Hey, Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. On today's episode, we are talking tabletop games. Tabletop games is a huge category on Kickstarter and something that deserves way more attention, I think, than we give it in the main sphere. One of the cool things about tabletops is way back in the day, it was virtually impossible to launch your own tabletop game. It was so hard, even getting the word out, getting into stores, super hard. But then all of a sudden, Kickstarter and crowdfunding comes around. And now it's unlocked the potential, the creative potential of anyone out there who loves playing tabletop games. It's no longer like a crazy thing for you to think that you could actually launch your own, right? You might think like card games or playing cards and tabletops and even strategy games, that would be ludicrous to think that I could launch my own. But in reality, you actually could. There are so many good artists online. There's so many people who can help you with the actual gameplay. If you need people like me who can help you as a coach, right? Going into a launch or a campaign, the marketing side of things. I know tons of people in this industry, and also resources that are out there to help you do print on demand if you want to get a prototype of the game. So there's so many resources now. And I think that today's podcast episode will help when it comes to launching one of these tabletop games. Some advice, another podcaster in the niche, he's come on the show to share some great tips and advice with you. So this is going to be applicable to obviously other categories as well. If you're trying to do something, as an author, you're trying to do something as a musician, or you're even trying to launch your own design product, I think it will still be useful for you and you will have some great takeaways from today's episode. But also, if you're trying to do your own tabletop, I think that the least discussed thing in this industry is not the making or we got to figure out this cool gameplay, or we got to do this, we got to do that. I think the least discussed is really how to build a business. How do you develop a career out of tabletop games? Can you actually even run a company that publishes board games and tabletops? Is that even possible? And the answer obviously is yes. If you listen to any of my episodes here or on YouTube or the bite-sized versions on Instagram, just search my name, Salvador Briggman, you'll come up with the episodes I've done with people who have launched 10. I think the most I've interviewed is a guy who launched 25 Kickstarter campaigns for different board games. It's clear to me that this is a potential route for you to go in the future. It's just how do you really do it? What do you need to get done to get there? And for your specific type of game, your category of game, is this something that's going to be a good fit for you? So I hope that you enjoyed today's podcast episode. If you'd like more education and information, number one, go and listen to me on YouTube. Got a lot of great videos out there. Go and download the Kickstarter launch formula, the book in Audible that I've written for you. Great Audible book if you'd like me listening to me in the car, on the way to work, etc. That could be a really good companion, I think, for you. And finally, my Instagram got some good bite-sized stuff there. But without further ado, let's get into today's podcast episode. This podcast episode is sponsored by the Gadget Flow. The Gadget Flow reaches over 28 million people, and they've been around since 2012. They're Indiegogo and Kickstarter experts. They featured over 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns. And if you have a technology or design campaign, it is a great platform to generate awareness and get backers. You can check them out at thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today I have another podcaster on this show, James, who has the Board Game Binge podcast, which he streams on Facebook. He's got a ton of great advice when it comes to starting and launching a board game on Kickstarter, how to crowdfund it, what you should do in order to set yourself up for success. James, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. How you doing?
So can we kind of get started? Maybe you can tell the listeners a little bit about your story and kind of how you got involved in this space.
Sure. I've been in the board game industry, I guess, probably for about 2.5 years. It doesn't sound like a long time. I actually created a game back when I was in university, and I date myself here, about 25 years ago. And at that time, I had these grand kind of ideas of taking this game and launching it back then when I graduated from my business degree. And what I quickly realized back in the 90s, that's when consoles and gaming on the digital side really took off. People weren't really doing board games anymore. The industry is super consolidated. So I parked and went and started a career in sales and marketing and both the food and supplements industry. And about 2.5 years ago, I had a brother who I played a lot of board games with introduced me to Kickstarter and said, gosh, you should take one of these old games you created and put it on Kickstarter. The independent board game industry is exploding. So I took his advice and said, yeah, let's do it. So I started Tin Robot Games, done 2 Kickstarters so far. One was a game called Tanks But No Thanks. And we launched that 2 years ago, kind of get my feet wet and kind of learn a little bit about Kickstarter. And I just most recently launched Queen Scott's the card game, which is a game that's been reskinned based on a game I've played with my grandmother my entire life, and she played her entire life and learned from her folks. So I guess about 100 years in the making this game. And we launched that on our 102nd birthday.
Wow.
We kind of part of it and stuff and have her name on the game and so forth. So that was kind of a special moment this past year. But from there, I really realized that, the first game was kind of getting my feet wet. Right. So it was a small campaign, raised about $10,000. Second campaign, likewise small, raised about $4,500. These are Canadian dollars, so even smaller when you're talking in the States. And really, it was kind of leading up to getting my skill set up to the point where we can start doing some larger campaigns. And we're working on a game right now called Nutty Squirrels. It's a casual game or a gateway game, which is kind of the style that I've focused on for Tin Robot Games. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be launching that at some point in the future. And that's kind of one of the key learnings I think that came out of all my research is the biggest mistake that people can make is they set an artificial date themselves, right? And then they try to stick to it. And then come hell or high water, they're going to hit that date. And, Jamie Stagmeyer got a great book. I would encourage anybody or quite frankly, just go to his webpage, Stagmeyer Games, and read any of his blogs. But he has a great quote in there. It says, if you do not launch on your, kind of preset date, nothing bad will happen. Nothing bad will happen. Bad can happen if you launch on a date when you're not ready.
Yeah.
Date out. Nothing, it's only going to help if you're not ready. So that was a good piece of advice.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to your understanding of board games and doing these different crowdfunding campaigns, how do you think a game launch differs from more of these traditional product launches on Kickstarter? Doing the gadget, gizmo, or some of the other categories. How do you think the games category differs?
Yeah, I think the games category has really reached a point now where it is the primary format for a lot of companies on how they actually take their games to market, right? So there's no intention to ever go to retail. Mm-hmm. Their Kickstarter launch is how they're going to make their revenue. In many cases, it is they're launching a game, right? So it's become a platform for selling their game, for lack of a better word. Or some of these other types of Kickstarters that you see are still in that zone of how Kickstarter was originally intended, right? Which is, we've got this idea, think we can make it happen. We don't know if we can, but gosh, we don't have the resources to make it happen. We need your help as a supporter to get there. And, we'll keep you involved along the way. And the end thing that we create is probably going to be a lot different than what we're looking at right now. The board game industry started that, for sure. But where it is now, you cannot launch a game on Kickstarter if it's not polished.
Yeah.
Any chance of success. And by success, I mean, you can launch a game and hit like the Queen of Scots game, for instance. Our target was $500. We knew we were going to make that game regardless, right? Because again, it was kind of done in honor of my grandmother and wanted it out, while she could still be part of the process. 102 every day counts. So, that's a $500 target. Of course, we crushed that target. But even if someone had a game that they wanted to create and they only need like $500 to launch it, maybe they only make a handful of games, that's fine. But if you're looking for kind of the traditional measure of success, which is one with the tens of thousands of dollars, you have to launch with a polished. The game has to be polished. People have to believe that this thing has been figured out. You figured out the shipping, you figured out the logistics, you figured out how this is going to get them. They need to have confidence that, once that campaign closes, they are going to get cases, I think, that you reflect back upon Kickstarter's history where people didn't get that end, the end thing they pledged for. So people are skeptical.
Totally. One of the things that I've noticed in the gaming industry is there are a ton of players who also want to become creators, right? And they've really enjoyed playing tabletops and board games, and they're like, okay, I want to make my own, right? It's kind of the same thing like when people are like, oh, I want to start my own business, right? And I see like a lot of people don't really pull the trigger or take action on it, right? Why do you think you were able to do that and really get out an end product when so many of these other board game wannabe creators aren't able to do that? What do you think holds them back?
Well, I think it had some of the benefit of my intent 25 years ago was to do this, and I just didn't know how. And it was then a 20-year career, quite frankly, in business. And, one company I worked with, a food company, for 11 years. 3 of those years I went. And so I have a good idea of how to create products, package products, get them to market. And having that skill set, I think probably put me in a good position to commercialize a game. So for me, when I made a decision that when I was introduced to Kickstarter, I had heard about it, but I really didn't pay much attention to it. And kind of shame on me that 2.5 years ago, I still wasn't really paying attention to Kickstarter, but I wanted to learn about it. right? And not just for the board game industry, but then to inform, other business that I was working on. I really, that's part of what drives me in my day-to-day life, is I'm always trying to find ways to increase my own bench strength, find different ways to learn new things. So what was exciting about that was I didn't look at it necessarily as, hey, I want to launch a board game. I did want to launch a board game and just get a game, something I made in people's hands to play. But it went beyond that. Okay, what can I learn out of this? And one thing I was very, very interested in was sourcing through China. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to source through China. I had no idea. I was always envious of others that did. And I set that as a goal for myself. You know what? I am going to figure this out. And I think if you come in with the mentality that you're going to figure things out, that is a good place to start for anybody getting into this industry. I think the other part too is the difference between the people that are the ideas guy. Like, oh, yeah, I got an idea for it. I always hear that, but they never kind of take that step forward and actually do something. Is you got to take that first step, and no matter how small it is, take a step.
It's almost like wearing multiple hats, right? Being able to put on the creative idea hat and then be able to take that off and put on the logistics hat, kind of.
Yeah, I kind of break it into two buckets, right? The one bucket is, do you want to create a game? Right? Because a lot of people that have ideas for games, but they still don't have anything but an idea in their head. So I think the one bucket is create a game, right? And there's enough tools now in the industry that it can help you do that. Tabletop Simulator, very good example. You do not have to have a high technical skill level to put a game on Tabletop Simulator. A lot of it's, there's a couple of things you can read and figure it out. You can figure it out. You can create a prototype, even visually, on Tabletop Simulator. You can do the old school way, like, my first game was created on a cookie sheet, right? So 25 years ago, I literally made the Banks and North Banks game. I had a Microsoft Excel, I printed it a grid. I had taken old pizza refrigerator magnets off my fridge and, used MS Paint to create a little clip art.
MS Paint, man.
We're talking old school here. And created a tax, these tax for the tanks. So, you can make a prototype of a game that supplies it around your house. A lot of people want to throw games in the garbage, throwing out their basement. Come across an old game of Sorry or one of these games that are never going to get played again. Instead of throwing it in the garbage, take all the pieces of it and put them in a container somewhere. Because those pieces maybe you can use at a later date for something you're going to create. So that's kind of the one bucket. It's actually just physically creating it. Right? The second bucket is, okay, do you want to try to take that to market or not? And there's a couple different paths. Okay, one is to try to find a publisher. And so someone else you hand the keys to someone else and they pay your royalty and they run with it, take care of them. Of course, that process is you have to find a publisher. You have to go to different prototype gaming nights that a lot of game shops will host. There's these proto fields out there. Now there's a lot of online prototyping things you can join where you can pitch your game to publishers and have a publisher potentially take it for you. Or if you want to go the path of doing it yourself, you can do that, but you have to put on the hat now of a business, right? So you got to get out of I'm just a game creator now. You get into, okay, I'm going to figure out how to run this as a business. And that is when you get into things of, okay, how is the game going to be manufactured? How are you going to get it to market? Now, if you're using Kickstarter, how are you going to do the fulfillment? You're going to do the fulfillment yourself. You're going to ship everything to your garage and then put the different mail labels on it and ship it out to your pledgers. Or are you going to use a third party? How are you going to promote it? How are you going to build an audience? Like, these are all the things, the checklists you have to go through to kind of start mapping out how you're going to approach it. That'd be my recommendation. Literally create a map. Okay, I'm going to straw man this in.
One of the most common questions I'll get is, hey, Sal, I got the gameplay down, but now I don't really know how to find a good artist. And I don't even know, should I just be following people on Instagram and DMing them? Should I be going to a website? What are your thoughts on finding a really professional, high quality artist?
Yeah, so on, if anybody checks out Tin Robot Games YouTube channel, I encourage you to go there because there's a lot of videos I've done in that regard, even along those lines. And if not that, even the boardgamebinge.com, you can see a lot of prior interviews where we actually talk to artists and so forth. There was a video I actually did on this very topic, which is how do you find an artist, right? So, if you go and get an Andrew Boswell, very famous artist. He did Everdell, right? So he did some pretty popular games, and I think Wanderer's Guide is another one he just did that's coming out on Kickstarter or just launched on Kickstarter. Somebody like that's going to be expected. So you don't have to necessarily go down there starting out. And what I did have some of my own prowess on using Illustrator and using Photoshop and so forth. You can start off using stock photography. Shutterstock, iStock Photo, these different sites, you can actually pay a small amount and license artwork that's already created and use that for your game. If you want to find out an artist, you go to Fiverr. That's what I did with the Queen of Scots. So we've got 17 portraits of different characters of the story, and they were all hand painted 8x10 portraits. Well, I found that person on Fiverr, right? So I went on Fiverr and just started looking at the different artists. might want to start with the people who are newly added to Fiverr. They're the ones who are going to want to build a portfolio quickest. So we're going to be willing to go a little bit further and do a little bit more for less. I also went for my nice growth game right now. I found Mitch DeSlep. Very, very talented artist out of Toronto. I met him at Comic-Con. So I went to Comic-Con here in Toronto, and there was aisles upon aisles of people that do illustrations for comics and different things like that. And he had a booth set up, and I was literally handing him cards, collecting cards for about 3 or 4 aisles. So I must have collected 50, 60 cards. And it was amazing. Of all those people I talked to, I said, hey, have you ever considered doing art for board game? And I may have found one that said, yeah, I've actually thought of that. Most of them had never even considered it, but almost all of them said, that'd be very interesting. That'd be something I'm interested in doing. So you can find people, like a freelance, go to any of the freelancer sites, and you can find people through there. But if you're looking at doing it on the cheap, my best suggestion would be Fiverr to start off with, or quite frankly, reaching out to local artists that you find at a fair.
Okay, well, yeah, well said. And even just taking some action and making contacts and sending out emails. I mean, I think that's a really important thing, is just to keep taking action. And I think you'll be surprised by the number of people who will get back to you, right? I mean, artists want to work. So as long as you have a sense of what it is that you want to give them and you have a budget, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier. If you're just like, I want something that's like this, but you don't really have any kind of slides, or you don't have anything to show them, it's really hard, I think, to communicate that.
Yeah, and that's one thing I would say. And we actually covered this off in 3 different interviews we've done on Board Game Binge Now podcast. We've talked to artists, because I always love to ask, how do you manage the uncomfortable discussion around price for your work? Right? So our work is very, very personal. It's something that somebody's creating, right, from nothing. There's a delicate line. Don't want to insult someone. And so I think the best way to do that is to say, look, here's the pieces I need, and be honest about what you need. So don't throw on 10 other pieces after they've already committed to do the work. But frame out, here's kind of what I need for the different pieces I have to do. And here's the budget I have. What can you do for the budget? You're going to have half those artists who say, yeah, I can do something, and here's kind of what I can do. Maybe I'll have the same background quality images. I can't do custom backgrounds on each one of those pieces for that budget, but I'll do different characters, for instance. You'll have others that'll be very honest. Budget. And that's okay, right? At least you're figuring that out before you get kind of partway down, down the work. Creating Scott's example, this artist, her Fiverr was, her budget was based per character that she drew. So look, I'm being honest with you. Here's how many characters I need. I actually found online different portraits of each of these characters from the history. And so I'm kind of looking at getting it like this. These are examples of what I'm looking for you to make in your stuff. So it was very clear what I'm looking for before she, agreed on that budget. And so there was no concerns afterwards. Oh, wait a second, there's some budget creep here, and this is going way beyond what we agreed to, or any of that kind of stuff. So that is paramount. You have to kind of map out exactly what it is you want.
Yeah.
And that can be a challenge for people too. Often people don't necessarily know what they want. You don't know what the entire industry is. There might be some things that you have to consider, but you don't know that because you just don't know. That's kind of part of the challenge.
Yeah, I think all the time we feel like we need to be so certain that we're going to go from point zero to finished product. But in reality, there are so many iterations. There are so many things that are changed. There's so many things we have to clarify in our own head of what we want. It's more like painting something, painting a canvas, and you have layer after layer after layer. And eventually you get to that finished point. But up until then, it's kind of like, well, we're kind of figuring this out. We're kind of figuring this out as we go.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. When you think of the example of how do I start? Because when you sit back and look at other campaigns, or even go to, again, Jamie Stagmeyer's on his blog, and look at all the steps he goes through on launching a game. I mean, it is substantial, right? So you can get overwhelmed by that. I think that keeps some people out too. It just seems like too big of a mountain to climb. But use that analogy. Hey, well, why don't you start by putting that initial white base coat on your canvas, right? And then start sketching out what is the initial look like. Before you know it, if you're doing a little bit each day, eventually get to your finished game, right? And launching a board game is very similar. Is start, right? Start now. Start with a step and say, today I'm going to come up with. Say you already have a game you want to launch. Okay, well, starting tomorrow, I'm going to start researching. Just listen to the podcast here. I'm going to go on Fiverr and start a business. Or tomorrow, I'm going to spend my day, spend 1 hour just trying to map out exactly where all the elements are going to be to get all of it, right? So if you try to do it that way, break it down to little bite sizes. Eventually you will.
A lot easier. Yeah.
Yeah, or at least if you're halfway through and you realize you've got a lot of work already done. It then motivates.
What are your thoughts on some of these sites like the Game Crafter that kind of help you get a game made?
Game Crafter, JT Smith. I'm a big fan of Game Crafter. I personally use GameCrafter for my most recent game. There's other sites. I think for a full game, GameCrafter in my mind is the place you really want it. I've used makeplayingcards.com for card samples. So when I did the Queen of Scots game, we went through about 4 different iterations before we got to the final artwork. And often you need to do that. You can see a physical prototype to look for things that are considered. One we had was a border. We didn't have a border on any of the cards. The problem is when the stack was on the table, you could see which card was coming up next based on it being a lighter color artwork and then the one next to it. So, simple things like that, we didn't realize we had a physical, copy in our hand. So, makeplayingcards.com is great about the cards. But GameCraft, again, is a site where you can go and you can upload your artwork, and they will print off one copy of your game and send it to you. And you're probably going to get that for the cost of if you went and bought that game at retail. Like that's how low cost they get.
That's so easy, yeah.
Oh, it's incredibly easy. And I think that there's nothing more satisfying playing your game with a prototype that actually looks like a finished. So if I take the Nutty Squirrels, for example, I took it to, now we have COVID. I haven't been to a meetup group in 9 months, but before COVID, I actually do our game nights at meetup groups. And there's people walking by the tables like, oh my God, what's that game? Where'd you get that game? And I'm like, oh, this is a game that's a prototype. No way. Because it
looks great, yeah.
Yeah, the cards were professionally done, the punch out, the player boards. Everything was professionally done. So, and they can even do custom meat, right? They can do even 3D printed meeples for you. So, GameCrafter is absolutely awesome. I would take that one step further.
If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured, I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfillrite, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist and it's free, you can go to fulfillrite.com/checklist. Again, that is fulfillrite.com/checklist. fulfillrite.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately.
If somebody's looking at launching the game, I've had a couple of colleagues that talked to me lately that said, I want to get my game out there, but I'm really nervous. Maybe I have a small number of followers that may not cover off the cost of a minimum run producing a game in, say, China, for instance, where you're looking at minimum 500 games typically. You go up to 1,000 games. It's kind of either 500 or 1,000 is your minimum runs typically. But the GameCrafter, you can set a strategy through your Kickstarter and say, okay, I raise only $3,000 on my Kickstarter campaign. I'm going to produce and fulfill through GameCraft. And you might end up making 50 cents a game. You're probably not going to make any profit, but you're going to be able to make a game that is actually sent out, created, and people are going to be able to play that game, and you've got that credibility and confidence of actually creating a game and fulfilling it. Or you could say, if we get up to say $10,000, well, then we'll switch over and we'll go from the traditional printers because it's going to be way cheaper to make that game per unit, and I'll be able to produce more profit. So I usually recommend that is to work out both scenarios. Go into your launch with both scenarios ready to pull the trigger on. So you can either pull it on using GameCrafter if you hit such a level, if you get up to a much larger level where you're able to compensate those or cover up the cost of those minimum runs, then instead of using GameCrafter, in that regard, I'll use direct manufacturing.
Yeah, it's almost going back to the way that it seems like you were launching your campaigns, which was you weren't necessarily, I always talk about what is the metric you're trying to optimize for? Like, what is your real goal? And I think a lot of the times we think profit's the real goal, when in reality, when you're just getting started, it's not, right? It's really about learning as quickly as possible, which it seems like is sort of the path that you took, right?
Absolutely. That would be my recommendation for anybody who's starting. There's no doubt. There are many cases of people that got really lucky and just hit a home run and things just clicked and people just that game happened to resonate with a lot of people and it just gained a lot of kind of viral coverage. And they're juggernauts, right? But I think if you look at the typical game of somebody coming in new, you're probably going to be under 30,000, let's say under 20,000 US is probably where you're going to land, right? So the lower you can set that initial target, faster you're going to actually hit it. And people like the back winners, right? So success breeds success. People see that you've already reached your goal, they're going to be more inclined to jump on that campaign than if you're struggling to kind of to get there or not, right? So they're going to kind of wait. It doesn't look like it's going to fund. They're not necessarily going to jump in. So if you can start with the lowest possible, Bobby Fiorentino, as a prior guest of yours, this game is a disaster. They very much took that approach. They said, you know what? We're going to go at a $500 goal, and we know that even if we only hit $500, that's okay. We've got our game out. We won't make any money. But we did what we accomplished. We learned about the process of how to take a game to market through Kickstarter. I think taking that kind of approach is very smart, right? And it's really kind of getting your knowledge base up.
Mm-hmm.
Those people that are into creating games typically have more than one idea.
Definitely, yeah.
Or idea. If it's a card game, it's a great way to start because there's not as many pieces. There's a lot of card game suppliers out there. It's a very easy place to start just to learn the process and then maybe come up with your heavier games done.
Okay. So someone comes here and they're like, hey, James, like I listened to what you said. I got some artwork. I got a prototype with the Game Crafter. Like I feel like I have all the stuff that I need here, but they're kind of dragging their feet. And they're like, I don't know if I'm ready yet. You know, do you have like a checklist or a few things that you think they should go through in order to determine whether or not they're actually ready to hit the launch button with Kickstarter?
Yeah, I think so. I want to break this into two parts. One is I want to kind of take you through a list that I would personally go through, and I am kind of going through right now even with Nutty Squirrels. And then kind of some of the key learnings that I've seen through the Board Game Binge podcast. Because we've had a chance, I think we're up to now 43 different interviews we've done with everything from developers to artists to fillers. And as we look at these different campaigns, I've been really keeping a close eye on what's the difference between like a $30,000 campaign and $1 million campaign. Is there any trends? And I am actually starting to see some similarities. So I'll cover those off in kind of part two. So part one, for me, I think you need to get a pre-launch signups at least around 500. So when you set up your Kickstarter, Kickstarter will give you a link you can send out as kind of like pre-sign up link that people can go there and say, notify me. It gives them a static shot of your header. And then once your campaign goes live, it'll notify all those people who just went live. So that is a very useful tool. You might see upwards around 5% version off of that. So if you can get that around 500, I think that's a good place to start. An email list, another thing that Bobby Fiorentino often talks about, and I've really focused on a lot more, is the one aspect you can own in this entire mix is your email list. Social media, you can build the biggest Facebook group you want, but Facebook could come along tomorrow and change the algorithms. That can be enough, like in the drop of a hat. You don't own that list. An email list you do. So if you can build up an email list, Dan Blacklock is another great example. He did Token Assessment recently. He also did Box Room. For him, the key was get that email list up as high as you can so you can then direct market to people who have opted in and are interested in learning about following your game. So I would try to get that list to a Facebook page. If you have a Facebook page around your game, around your company, try to get your followers, your likes up to around 1,000. For me personally, we've got Board Game Binge group that we're creating. Not necessarily for self-promotion. It's primarily focused just on sharing learnings on how to bring games to market. But just as a little kind of target for me, knowing that, going through the process of actually building that, and the amount of reach out you have to do to different individuals to get that group up to 1,000 sets you very clearly on your way of where you need to go in terms of building that audience. Stretch goals. Map out your stretch goals. When we launch a campaign, we did the Queen of Scots one. We knew that we had a finished game. We were launching regardless of where we landed on our funding. And I lost sight of kind of what we did in the first game, which is create a bunch of stretch goals. And actually had people reach out to me partway through the campaign saying, where's your stretch goals? So we came up with one at the last minute, which is this dealer coin that they could get as a brass coin. It was really nice. Kind of that at the last minute. We should have had those not better. So shame on us. Mid-campaign announcements. Okay, so you hit your funding, you crushed your goal in the first 2 days. You got this reverse bell curve. And you run a Kickstarter where you have most people come in the first 48 hours and you come in the last 48 hours. So you see a big dip kind of mid-campaign. Well, you need to have some kind of announced campaign. What is that announcement? Map that out before you even launch. That will reduce your stress substantially. Prototypes. Make sure those prototypes are polished. Did you just get one made from Game Crafter? Well, it's the same shipping cost for them to ship you one game as it is to send 5 games. So if you can afford to do, say, 4 or 5 prototypes, and now you have something you can send to reviewers. They actually have physical samples that they can photograph when they're doing a video review for you, which you can then embed into your Kickstarter page. That's going to look way more professional. For me, I'd make sure you hit maybe 4 video reviews if possible. We had a lot of reviews on Thank You, No Thanks, but in terms of actual people recording the video for me, we only had 1, and it wasn't kind of where we wanted to be, so we didn't actually even embed that. All the campaigns I see where people are funding successfully have typically 3-4 video reviews done of their game. To do that, you're going to have to reach out to these people at least 3 months before you're launching to give them time to actually put together. There's a lot of them that are busy. You don't necessarily need to get the top ones. There's a lot of people getting the bigger reviews, so reach out to maybe someone who has a smaller following, but is going to invest the time to actually create a quality review for you. So That's kind of the checklist.
You talk about a lot of these things, like, for example, the email list, the Facebook group, the Facebook page. Where are these people coming from that make up those numbers?
That's an excellent question. I think typically you want to find people, obviously, that are in the board game industry, that are interested in board games in general. It helps that these people actually understand Kickstarter as well, right? So, part of our current list we've been building over the past 2 campaigns, when we did our social media ads, it very clearly was a Kickstarter-focused social media ad where we were gathering email addresses. When you run a campaign, if you're doing a pledge manager, and this is my point 2 on this, is you have the ability to self-fulfill to send out a survey to all your people that pledged for your campaign. In there, you want to ask them, are you willing to receive further communication from us, updating you on this game as well as future games we're working on? You're going to have at least 60% of people are going to opt in saying, yes, you can use my email address. Technically, you're not allowed to email people unless they opt in. Right? Kickstarter is very, very diligent about this. They will send you warning upon warning saying, this list, this campaign. And you can't just take this list and start spamming these people with any kind of information you have on your company or your game. So it's important you ask people to opt in. The time to do that when you do that survey. Now, you can do your own fulfillment, you can do your own survey. Fulfillment company like CrowdOps, BackerKit, Pledge Manager, GameFound, all very good ones. They will take care of that for you in terms of the surveying. Just make sure when they're doing that survey that you're asking them to get that opt-in question specifically for your company to be able to continue to send emails.
Yeah, definitely. Well said. So it sounds like they're going to be coming from a combination of places, but a lot from doing Facebook ads, right? To build the list and to build the page and such.
Instagram's another great one. I talked to Tanner Yarrow Studios. He had a massive campaign. He had $1 million on one of his D&D games. And what he did is he tapped into the D&D Instagram, right? So I started targeting people who are into Dungeons and Dragons through Instagram. So, Facebook, Instagram, those are going to be the 2 primary areas to gather these. He can do Google ads, but I think you'll get a better return on investment if you pump that money into Facebook ads.
And in terms of a budget, what would you say people should budget for their launch? Should they put aside, $2,000? Should they put aside $5,000? What do you think they should budget for the launch from the marketing side?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's a bit of a depends, right? So I tend to look at percentages, right? So I would say that 1/3 of your budget, whatever it is, because everybody's going to have a different budget. You have some people that come in and say, I got 20 grand and I'm pumped into this. You have other people that say, I've got, $100. So it really depends on where you are on the spectrum in terms of your Kickstarter campaign. But whatever it is, you should dedicate 1/3 of your budget to your manufacturing, 1/3 to, social media. So, your ads, whether you're using a social media amplification company like a Green Inbox or Jello, or if you're doing it yourself. But 1/3 of that budget should be going to ads, and then the last 3 is going to be...
Well said. Well, we've been covering a lot of nitty gritty when it comes to producing a game. For you, what would you say is the most rewarding part of this entire process? Because let's be honest, there's a lot of legwork here to get something made. For you, what's the most rewarding aspect?
It still comes down to seeing somebody that is, I guess, at the heart of, outside of publishers, because publishers aren't necessarily promoting their own games. Often they're promoting other people's games. But for someone who's a game developer, that feeling you get, you see a group of strangers playing something you created, they're laughing, they're having fun, and they're excited. There is absolutely no feeling like that. I had a local school, my Texas Northlands game, where they had a learning center at the school. So they had the game learning center, and they reached out to me and said, these kids who are coming for extra help and, looking for ways to improve their socialization, they're playing this game at recess, and they've actually started tournaments at the school.
That's awesome.
I was like, you know what? Get them to set up a tournament. I will donate a game as a prize, and I have these little 10 robots that for some of my friends and family. I'll give them a 10 robot as a trophy, but I wanted to encourage that because it was such an amazing feeling to hear that. I just couldn't stop smiling.
Yeah, that's so cool. And also just even to think that the games that you play when you're younger really make up your childhood, make up the things you reminisce about. You spend time with family. It's all centered around games. I remember many times playing Monopoly and Risk with my dad and stuff, and just going really late into the night, right? And those are the things that you remember, and it can really have a profound impact, I think, on people around the world for that reason.
They're very tactile. And I kind of look at it this way. It's kind of like, I look at the difference between, say, a board game, very tactile, versus, say, a video game. To me, it's the difference between saying goodbye to your kid and saying goodbye to your kid with a hug. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One is tactile. One, you have a flow of energy. One, there's a personal connection. The other one's very surface level. Right? So for me, the tactile, I am so happy to see this industry do a full 180 because it was sharply declining in the 90s. Board games were dead. There's 2 or 3 guys, and that was it. And to see a reemergence of this entire indie industry, it's just amazing because it's getting back to putting electronics aside and getting back to interaction with people. Because that's what's all about.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. And I even remember just like with my uncle playing chess so much. It's like you always kind of have this running joke of like who's up +1 or +2, who's like one game over the other person. And it just kind of really cements, I think, a bond with people. It's so cool you can have the creativity to be able to make a whole new game from scratch, right? And be able to get that into people's hands. I think that's what a lot of people really want to experience is that rewarding feeling that you've been feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of people out there that want to do that. If you go to any game now and ask, show of hands, how many people here either thought about creating a game or have an idea for a game? 98% of people put up their hands. Almost everybody that is in this industry at least has an idea. More than half of them, I would say, have an idea they actually want to turn into something physical. And then a very small percentage fall through that and take it to full-scale launch on something like Kickstarter or another platform.
Do you think that this is an activity that people can turn into their career? I've had people on the show who are able to turn their board game hobby, making small games, actually into a career, be able to do it full time and create businesses out of it. What do you think it takes to really get to that kind of a level where you're not just running, Kickstarter campaigns every once in a while, but you actually really have a business behind it?
That's an excellent question. And, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer on this one, but I truly believe that it's kind of like, I look at it almost like, right? So if you got a kid playing hockey, and you say, could this guy be an NHL player or something? Well, sure, he could, but the odds are stacked against him. And there's a lot of work, playing pickup hockey and getting to play in the NHL. I see the game industry very similar. Again, you have those unique cases where things have just connected and just launched into the stratosphere and they end up turning it into an actual business. But there's a lot of work to get there. And I think that people, when they're creating games or looking to publish a game, start with the expectation that this is a hobby. And you know what? The reward is having people play the game. And the reward is strangers, purchasing and investing in something that you've created. The gravy there is if you can make money off that, that's great. And, if you do subsequent campaigns and, you start to get the hang of it, because again, it's accumulated learning. Right? Each one of these, you learn more, and it gets easier, and you've got an audience you've built and you keep building on. Yes, you could eventually get to a point where it is a business, but I wouldn't go into it with the expectations. I think you need to go into it with the expectation that this is a hobby and a passion that you want to explore. And if it turns out it's something more, that's awesome. But that should be the core reason.
I think that the other thing I would add to that is the NHL is a really good analogy, because you think of playing as an individual player, but really business is a team sport, right? So to get to that kind of level and to get to a place where you're looking at a Kickstarter and it's super polished and they've raised $1 million, it's a massive blind spot to think that just one person did that, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of times we kind of fall back into that mindset where really it's about assembling a team of people that can pull off these larger kinds of projects.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that team can be virtual too, right? So that team doesn't necessarily have to be employees, right? So I don't want people under the illusion, I have to have a staff, 12 to launch a game. But you do need to have people that are extensions of you, whether that be virtually or otherwise. They will help you get there, especially through larger numbers, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. One of the key learnings that I noticed in campaigns that are doing 30,000 versus games that are doing 1 million, fairly consistently, I'm seeing most of them have a pledge manager, right? So you could do the manager pledges yourself at the end, send the survey out, and then arrange all the shipping and so forth. But and do that survey.
Spend a heck of a lot of time, yeah.
Yeah, it's not even the time, but it's not even like it's rocket science. But what these companies like CrowdFunding or BackerKit or Pledge Manager, GameFound, what they come with is they have an audience of opt-ins that they are also marketing to in addition to your marketing. So they have their monthly email list to go out. And some of them, they're up around 70,000 people. If they're sending an email out to you every month saying, these are the games that today we're doing our pledge management on this month. That kind of exposure, you don't get it if you're doing that survey yourself. Another example is what I call social media amplification. So there's 2 good ones there. There's Green Inbox and there's Jello. Right? And these are 2 companies that essentially will work with you and they will manage your social media ads for you. So you will give them the assets, like the artwork or any videos or anything you've created, and they will go and they will, for a percentage of your social media spend, they will manage the social media. Well, they've got AI software assisting them with that. They've got a team of 50 people that are going through 150 different iterations of an ad to find out which one is going to have the best return on investment. You can't do that on your own. So that's another example of something you can do as a plugin where these larger campaigns are taking advantage of these kind of services. I've always said to people too, if you want to increase your profits, instead of picking one company somewhere on the planet and getting them to take care of all the fulfillment, break it up. Find a company in the States, like the Games Quest, or like a quartermaster logistics. Find one in the UK, like Games Quest. Go with maybe Aetherworks out of Australia, in Canada. If you live in Canada, do it yourself. Maybe use Snakes and Lattes or D6. By having your manufacturer ship straight to those fulfillment centers, you're going to save an immense amount of money in shipping and duties versus shipping it into one country and then trying to then send it to all these other countries. You have all these levels of markup that you put on top of that. So there's different things you can do in terms of adding these kind of extended team members or these third-party services on that can shoulder a lot of load for you and really allow you to tap in, give you access to their networks and their audiences that they've already built.
Well said, well said. Awesome, man. Well, this has been a ton of good content. Where can people go to learn more about your show and some of the stuff you're doing there?
Yeah, so 2 places I would suggest. If you want to learn more about Tin Robot Games and the upcoming Nutty Squirrels game, check us out at tinrobotgames.com. All of our social media handles are the same, at Tin Robot Games. YouTube as well, at Tin Robot Games. And the Board Game Binge podcast, go to boardgamebinge.com. There are links there to take you to our closed Facebook group where we do a couple of sweepstakes a month that we give stuff away just for the members. We draw and just pick a number at random and they win a prize. You can learn about little bite-sized chunks about the board game industry and how it comes together. And our entire back catalog is actually at boardgamebinge.com where you can see all the prior videos we've done. So if you want to learn more about Sandbox, you can look for the Green Inbox video. If you want to learn more about Crowdox, look for the Crowdox video and so forth. So it's there to help people and act as a resource to others. And it's kind of what I was looking for 2 years ago, right? So I couldn't find this other than, of course, the James Stagmeyer's involved. I couldn't find exactly this kind of breakdown. So we built.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it and all the great stuff that you've shared here today. And I think if nothing else, I took away that it's really a lot in your head. If you feel like you can't start a game, or you feel like you can't get something to market, a lot of it's in your head because there's so many resources out there nowadays to be able to get started quite easily. And even just to get the artwork done, do initial prototype on the Game Crafter, like it's really possible for you to do this, I think. So I appreciate you, man.
No worries. Well, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. My name is Salvador Briggman. Thank you for joining me on today's podcast episode. On this show, I like to document a lot of different types of categories: design products, hardware, tabletops, comics, you name it, right? The whole genesis of this show is just to shed some light on this process and to do it using the kind of, I guess, I don't know, trademarked, if you want to say, or at least my approach, Sal's approach to figuring stuff out. I'm a very no nonsense guy. I don't like it when people use very fancy language to hide what it is that they're trying to explain. I don't like it when people, talk down to you, or I don't like it when they veil a lot of what they're doing with their marketing in a way that makes them look better than they are, right? So when I was getting into this industry, my whole goal was to kind of pull back the hood for you, or pull back the curtain and show you exactly what is happening behind successful crowdfunding campaigns. What is happening, whether it's, a mess behind the scenes or it's going super well and it's something to emulate. And not only that, to get into the story of the entrepreneur and the individual so that you can see yourself maybe someday doing one of your own projects. That is literally the whole thing that I want you to get away from this, is that it is possible. It is possible to do this. It's not rocket science, guys. People who are much smarter than me, people who are really incredibly skilled. I brought on this podcast. We've also brought some people on the podcast who will openly tell you, dude, I don't even know what I was doing, right? And I just launched this thing and I was listening to your tips and it worked, and now we're going into fulfillment, So it's one of these things where it's not about intelligence. It is not about even necessarily know-how, I would say. You don't have to necessarily be a crowdfunding expert to run a successful Kickstarter campaign. In fact, I would say that the majority of guests that I have on this show are not saying that they're crowdfunding experts or Kickstarter experts, right? What they're saying is they had a successful campaign. They found out some things that work for them. And my role in this process is to figure those out, tease those out, and deliver them to you, right? I'm not saying that like the people that we bring on, like, one category might be tabletops, one might be design, that it works for everyone. Instead, I'm just trying to give you access. I'm trying to get you access, man. I'm trying to have you touch some of these stories and some of these projects and realize that these are just ordinary people just like you and me. The only difference is that they, number one, are taking action right on their product idea. Number two, they're getting validation. Number three, they're putting their guts on the line to make this happen and to maybe have a public flop if it doesn't go super well, right? Maybe lose a tiny bit of money when it comes to their marketing. But that's really the name of the game. It's about risk. It's about doing something that you believe in. Anytime that you felt fear in your life when it comes to launching a new business, pursuing a new career opportunity, doing something you never thought you would, like maybe even talk to someone that you're interested in romantically, right? And you get goosebumps. Why do you get goosebumps? Because you're simultaneously afraid and excited, right? That middle stage where it's like, I'm afraid, but I'm also really excited, and you get goosebumps because you realize you're doing something that's integral to your soul. You're doing something that's integral to what your purpose is. It's such like, it makes you feel alive, coming to work rather than just doing a cookie cutter job, making widgets in a cubicle for other people to buy and to show up in a box on their doorstep for them to just discard or to put on their bookshelf, right? And to never use it again, right? Or let's just say like they open up a product and they try it once or twice and then they just don't use it. That to me is not exciting. It's not a compelling future. What's exciting to me is when you are actually doing something that connects with your purpose, when you're doing something that gets you excited, that gets your customers excited. A really good product launch is one where when you're working with me, we see the clients and people are responding to it and like they're posting all over and they're so excited. I can't wait for this to come out, right? That's the kind of energy that you want to have. That's the kind of effect rather that you want to have on your customers. And when they get it in the mail, them to literally be like, I'm so ridiculously excited for this product. Like it's insane, right? But it just brings me a lot of joy. That's like what you want to kind of tap into. And I think that the number one thing that's holding people back, aside from some of the stuff we discussed on the show, is access to these teachings, access to the people, and access to the stories so that you too know that it is possible 100%. And there's nothing that is stopping you if you are serious. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. My name is Sal. Take a second to give me a rating and review on iTunes, and I will see you next time.